So all of us have that thing that we do where time stands still. And some people call that being in the zone or being in a state of flow. Now you might get that from playing music. We might write more and more or play more and more complex pieces of music to get more and more into that state. Or you might get into that state as an artist, say painting canvas after canvas to get deeper and deeper into that state. Now for me, I find that place through nature, through being out in the outdoors. And over time I found that the deeper and deeper I could go into these wild places that we have on the planet, the more connected I would feel, and the more in that state of presence. I've come to call that feeling the connection. Now that's what I want to talk about here this afternoon. I want to share a story with you about the first time I felt this feeling of connection. I was 18 years old, living back in Australia, and I was taken out as part of my job to do a course that's run by a group called Outward Bound. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Outward Bound, but what they do is take young people out into the mountains or into the wilderness to take them outside of their comfort zone for personal growth. So I was taken on this course, and I'm embarrassed to have to say this afternoon, but the first day of that trip almost broke me in every way. We set out and we started out, we were told that we had to march straight up the side of this mountain called Mount Bogong. And it's not super high, but it's quite steep. And I wasn't in good enough shape, and I barely made it to the top. I mean it almost broke me physically, spiritually, emotionally. I just about crawled to the top, and I felt horrible for the next couple of days. And then about 3 days after that, we did this thing that's called the solo. And what the solo is each of us was sent out in a different direction to spend the night on our own. And remember, we're out on top of a mountain, so it's kind of a pretty out there thing. Now the thing is, we were sent out with only a water bottle, empty water bottle, a box of matches, and a small bag of flour. And we were told, don't come back till the morning. And so out I went, I found water, I made a fire, and I remember thinking, wow, this is really easy. And so I was sitting in front of the fire, and then I fell asleep, and I woke up half an hour later, freezing. So I thought, okay, I kept the fire going all night, and then here's what happened. At one point, I was lying back, looking up at the billions and billions of stars, and I had this feeling that felt like being electrocuted. And this calm came over me, and for the first time in my life, I felt this peace. Like I was so small, but part of something huge. And that's the feeling that I came to call the connection. I spent the next 14 years chasing that feeling. I chased it all over the planet. Eventually I got back to Australia and I tried to settle back into normal life. I didn't last very long. I eventually had this feeling of feeling disconnected again, like something was missing inside, and I knew that I had to go put on a backpack and go somewhere. I'd heard about a mountain called about an island called Hinchinbrook Island off the coast of North Queensland, where the Great Barrier Reef is. And it's known as a wild place. They limit the number of people that can go there at any one time. So I thought, perfect. So I caught the boat across. My plan was to spend 5 days hiking down the length of the island, and then a second boat would pick me up. On the first night on the island, I met a guy on the beach, a Dutch guy, by the name of Geert van Koolen. And Geert told me that what he wanted to do was climb to the top of the island's tallest peak, Mount Bowen. And as soon as he said that, I thought, that's a no-brainer, let's do it. So first light the next morning, we set off to climb this mountain. We climbed all day. At the end of the day, we made camp. We had just cooked dinner. Geert had just got inside his sleeping bag I was just about to get into my sleeping bag when I realised, well, hang on a minute, before I do that, I need to use the bathroom. Now, there's no bathrooms on the side of a mountain, obviously, but what you really need to do is you need to get away from the creek, right? Because we're going up the mountain following this creek. That's our water supply, so you need to get away from it. And so the easiest way for me to do that, I thought, was to cross over where there was a rock wall, and then I would climb up and over the rock wall, and then that would be good. I'd be far enough away. So I made my way across, and I found a crack in the rock wall. And at the time I thought, well, that's perfect. I'll use that crack to climb up and out. So I got my hands in that crack, got my right foot up against the wall, got my left hand up a little bit higher, and I pulled up to start climbing. And as I pulled up, I heard this almighty crack, and the world underneath me gave way. The next thing I knew, I just got slammed back down into the creek bed. I had no idea what had happened. All I knew was that straight away I was in a world of pain, never felt anything like it. I screamed out. Geert came running over to see me pinned from the hips down underneath a refrigerator-sized piece of rock, a 1-ton slab of rock. And things got pretty crazy at that point. He jumped in beside me. We're both pushing at this thing. For the next 2 hours, we tried everything to lift up this rock, and nothing was happening. We couldn't move it. So we made a decision that the next morning he would hike out and organise a rescue. It would be the only way to get me out. So I spent the longest night of my life waiting for the sun to come up, and then in the morning I watched Geert pack up his things. We hugged each other goodbye. I watched him turn around and walk back down off that mountain, and I tell you, I've never felt so alone as watching him walk away, because I knew that I was going to be there for at least a whole day. So he walked away, and I settled in to do the only thing that I could do was wait. Wait and think. Had a lot to think about when you're trapped like that. It wasn't lost on me that I'd spent my whole life chasing these experiences of being out in nature, out in a wild place, and now here I was looking like I would probably die in the mountains. And I remember thinking, are you happy now? Is this what you've been looking for? Is this connected enough for you? Yeah, it didn't feel very good. I ended up spending the best part of 2 days trapped underneath that rock, until eventually I got to hear what is still today my favourite sound.
Boulder out on Hinchinbrook Island. We went out in the helicopter and winched down on the wire cable with our equipment, and indeed found this fellow who was in trouble. We were on scene about 2.5 hours. Most of that time spent resuscitating him and getting the boulder off. I thought we almost lost him twice, particularly when we removed the boulder, but he seemed to come back each time, which attests to his good physical condition. And I think once he realized we were there, he roused, and really he put forth a heroic effort to get himself out of there with our help.
So they got me to hospital, and I had a surgeon come and explain to me that my legs had been so badly damaged that they would have to amputate them that night. And I remember just thinking, whatever, do whatever you need to do. And I cried myself to sleep and woke up the next afternoon into a whole new world, into a completely new reality. I woke up like this. And so began my new life. For the next 10 days, I was in intensive care, not knowing whether I would live or die. And then eventually I got out into the regular hospital. And it was then that I started to wonder, well, what kind of life can somebody have like this? Somebody that loves being in the outdoors. Everywhere I turned, it seemed like there was a new obstacle. Right? I had to learn how to use a wheelchair. I learned how to swim. I had to learn really how to do everything again, drive a car, just everything. Everywhere I turned, it seemed like there was something new to learn. But what I realised is that each time that I overcame an obstacle, it made me stronger for the next one. And so eventually I got to the point where I started even looking for obstacles. If there wasn't an obstacle there, I went looking for one. And eventually, while on a hike, I started hiking in the wheelchair. I got the mountain bike wheels and I would go out and hike. And I was on a hike one day and an image came to my mind. A picture of a mountain in Tasmania called Cradle Mountain. Now I think this picture came to mind because I had climbed Cradle Mountain twice before. And this image came with a question. I wonder if a guy with no legs could climb a mountain. Is that even possible? And I knew there was really only one way to find out. And so I started training. I got some friends and family together and we all went down to the island of Tasmania and we set out on this journey to see whether it was possible for somebody with no legs to do something like this. And you could see we started out from the parking lot here. You can see the mountains off in the distance and started heading towards the mountain, and then once we got to the base, I ditched the wheelchair and took off on my backside up the mountain, because one of the things that I realised while I was in rehab was that the wheelchair for me is a tool. Right? I'm not stuck in it, and when the tool doesn't suit me anymore, I can leave it behind. So I left it behind and started navigating all of these obstacles on the way up the side of Cradle Mountain. And so it's basically just about going up and up and up over all the rocks that are in the way until eventually 2.5 days after leaving the parking lot, I got to sit on top of Cradle Mountain. And thank you. And I'll tell you that there's a couple of things about this image. One is that my car is way in the distance there. And so for a guy that now uses a wheelchair to be so far away from the parking lot was kind of a big deal. But another thing about this image is that the reason that I've got those sunglasses on is I just got overwhelmed with emotion. And I mean overwhelmed. Everything came back at me. The accident, the losing both legs, the 2 days under the rock, the months and months of rehab, everything just, it's like it just slammed me. And so as a guy, I can't be seen showing too much emotion, especially as an Australian guy, right? I think it's illegal for a man to cry in Australia, so I had to keep those sunglasses on. But the reason that it hit me so hard was that this photo was taken not even a year after the accident. It's taken 10 months after losing both legs. And so what that says to me is, what does that say about human potential? About what we're all capable of when we're pushed up against the wall like that? It's pretty amazing what we can pull off. And I think probably the bigger reason that I got so overwhelmed in this moment was that I just got the biggest feeling of connection that I'd ever had. I'd reclaimed that part of my life. And so from there, 12 months later, I did a climb of probably one of the wildest mountains in Australia that you can climb, Federation Peak, in a 4-week journey. And then 4 years after that, set out on a climb of Africa's tallest peak, Mount Kilimanjaro. Again, this time in a 3-week journey. Epic trip. I actually did the climb with a young guy from Tanzania that was born without arms. But here's the thing, after doing these climbs, something really interesting happened. I realised that it's not really about climbing mountains. That this journey that I'm on is really about creating, because I had created a new life for myself. Right? Out of a devastating situation, I got to create something new. To the point that if I had the chance to go back now and not be here like this, I wouldn't go back. Right? I've learned too much from this experience and become so much stronger that I wouldn't go back. So for me, the question really is, I believe that we're all here to create something. Right? It's why we're on this planet. I think the days of just taking things in and consuming are over. Now it's time that we turn it around and we transmit, and that we put our creation out there into the world. And I think if we're going to tap into that creative power, the best way to do that is to spend time in those places where we find that connection, where we're in the zone, where we're in that state of flow, whatever that is for you. It could be being out in the outdoors, it could be music, it could be art, it could be knitting. You know, whatever it is for you, your job is to spend time in that place so that you can tap into that power to create. So my closing thought for you guys is, if a guy like me can go from here to here, then what does that mean for you? What is it that you're here to create? And here's the heads up, because the clock's ticking. As soon as you've figured that out, you've got to get on it and make it happen, because the world needs whatever it is that you've got to put out there. Thank you.